A town of 12,000 people just north of Milwaukee. 2-1 is the margin. Port Washington, Wisconsin, deep red, Ozaukee County, Republican, for over 2 decades, voted 2-1 to require voter approval before their city can hand out tax breaks to data centers. Same week, down in Festus, Missouri, Jefferson County, also overwhelmingly Republican, voters didn't just reject a data center proposal. They threw out every single incumbent on the city council who'd approved one. Every one. A $6 billion project? Gone. The people who greenlit it? Gone. And then there's Indianapolis. Ron Gibson, a city council member who supported a data center project, woke up before 1 a.m. to find 13 bullet holes in his home. His 8-year-old son was inside. On the doorstep was a note. No data centers. I want to be very clear about this. That act of violence is not protest. It is not democratic expression. It is a crime. It's terrifying, and it has to be condemned without qualification. But the fact that it happened, alongside peaceful ballot measures passing by landslides, tells you something about the intensity of feeling that AI infrastructure is generating in communities across the country. So what's actually happening in these towns, like for the actual people? Well, imagine someone showed up in your neighborhood and they said, we're going to build a facility that uses as much water as 10,000 homes, draws as much electricity as a small city, runs diesel generators for backup, and in exchange, we'd like a tax break. Oh, and the jobs? Mostly during construction, 50 permanent positions maybe. So obviously you'd have questions. You'd want to vote. And that's all Port Washington asked for, the right to vote before those tax breaks get handed out. And when they got that right, they used it. 2-1. The first community referendum on a data center project in 2026. Monterey Park, California votes in June on a complete ban. Boulder City, Nevada, and Janesville, Wisconsin have fall measures, and at least 11 states are considering legislative pauses on new construction. Now, the Century Report has tracked this arc from its earliest signals. Monterey Park's petition, Saline Township's forced approval, Kentucky farmers declining data center offers at any price. And on April 7th, we identified Port Washington as the first local vote of 2026 and predicted the results would set the stakes for every upcoming ballot measure. Yesterday confirmed that, and then some. I want you to notice the political geography. These aren't liberal enclaves pushing back against big tech. These are communities that reliably vote for the same political coalitions that have championed technology sector growth. The infrastructure demands of the intelligence era are creating political fault lines that don't map out onto any existing partisan alignment. There is no data center party. There's just people who live somewhere and want a say in what gets built next door. The ballot measure is the oldest democratic technology we have, and it turns out it works just fine against the newest industrial one. The deeper signal also matters for the AI industry specifically. These companies need physical infrastructure at enormous scale. Cooling, power, land, fiber. They can't build it in a vacuum, literally or politically. And the model that's been operating, quiet negotiations with city councils, tax incentive packages, fast approvals, that model just hit a wall made of ballot boxes. Now what comes next has to look different. Benefit sharing agreements, community ownership stakes, transparent impact assessments with real teeth. The communities where this infrastructure gets built aren't asking the industry to, quote, go away. At least most of them aren't. Some are, of course. But they're asking at least to be at the table. And when they're not invited, they're pulling up their own chairs. All right, another story on this. While communities were asserting control over what gets built on their land, something more subtle was happening that will matter for decades. 5 offshore wind farms, Vineyard Wind, Revolution Wind, Coastal Virginia Offshore Wind, Sunrise Wind, and Empire Wind. Collectively over 4 gigawatts of generation capacity, enough power for more than 2 million homes. They just became permanent. The Interior Department had a deadline to appeal court injunctions that blocked the government's stop work orders on these projects. But that deadline expired. No appeal was filed, and reportedly, the reason is that filing one would have killed bipartisan permitting reform negotiations in the Senate. Senator Sheldon Whitehouse made it explicit. Appeal this, and there's no permitting bill. So, the government let the clock run out. Now think about what this means structurally. Every developer challenged the stop work orders in court. Every federal judge found those orders legally deficient. Surprise, surprise. The government's national security rationale, The stated reason for halting the construction was found unsupported. Surprise, surprise. And the case law that emerged from those rulings now says construction permits, once granted through the federal review process, cannot be arbitrarily, keyword, suspended. Every future offshore wind developer has that precedent as foundation now. Vineyard Wind is 95% complete and already generating electricity. It saved New England ratepayers $2 million per day during a December cold snap. Revolution Wind and Coastal Virginia both started sending power to the grid last month. Sunrise Wind, which was 45% done when halted, has now resumed. These aren't proposals or permits or plans. They're steel already in the water, electrons on the wire, money saved on bills. And this connects to something about how transitions actually work that I think gets missed in a lot of the coverage. We talk about the energy transition as if it's a debate that someone wins. Pro-renewables versus pro-fossil, left versus right. But once a wind turbine is built and generating electricity and saving people money and protected by settled case law, there's no debate anymore. It's now just infrastructure. It operates for 25 to 30 years, regardless of who holds political office. The transition doesn't require anyone's permission once the physical facts are established, and they are. It just continues. These 5 farms survived the most aggressive federal intervention the offshore wind industry has ever faced. And they survived because they were already built or nearly so when the intervention came. Physical reality is the ultimate filibuster-proof majority. Century Report tracked this arc on March 15th, when Vineyard Wind and Revolution Wind completed construction despite the federal stop work orders, the first major U.S. offshore completions to survive that legal gauntlet, and yesterday's deadline expiration locks in what those completions started. All right, let's shift away. A California lawsuit filed yesterday tells a story that I think every person using AI needs to hear, not because it's the scariest story, but because it reveals a specific and fixable failure that is producing real harm right now. According to the complaint, a man used ChatGPT to produce clinical-style psychological reports about his ex-girlfriend, documents that looked and read like professional assessments, and he distributed them to her family, her friends, her employer. He used the system to organize and refine his delusions into something that appeared authoritative. OpenAI's own automated safety system detected mass-casualty weapons activity on his account and flagged it, deactivated it. Conversation titles on the account included, and I want to be specific, violence list expansion and fetal suffocation calculation. Obviously, the system caught that. The automated system did its job this time. A human safety reviewer looked at the account the next day and restored access. The man continued using ChatGPT to then stalk his ex-girlfriend. Now sit with the architecture of that failure for a second, because it's not about AI doing something wrong. The automated detection did work. The model itself was not the point of failure. The failure was institutional, the distance between a safety flag and a safety response. A system flagged mass casualty weapons activity, and a probably very overworked human being reviewed an account with those conversation aspects and clicked restore. Now, that gap between detection and meaningful intervention is where the harm really lives. This lawsuit arrives alongside the Florida Attorney General's investigation into OpenAI following the FSU shooting, and alongside OpenAI's support for an Illinois bill that would limit AI labs' liability even in mass casualty cases. This convergence is important. Documented harm, state investigation, and legislative liability shielding all in the same news cycle. The Lancet Psychiatry Taxonomy, published on March 14th, you'll remember, had already identified this sycophancy to delusion pipeline across 20 clinical cases and found Claude was the only tested platform that consistently refused to assist violent planning. That clinical data and this lawsuit are describing the same structural problem from different angles. The trajectory through this difficulty leads somewhere specific. Clinical-grade interaction monitoring, real-time intervention protocols, institutional processes that connect automated flags to mandatory human review standards. Not one reviewer making a solo judgment call, but escalation ladders with accountability at each step. The technical capability for detection exists. What doesn't exist yet is the institutional architecture that treats a mass casualty weapons flag the way a bank treats a fraud alert. with mandatory holds, supervisor review, and documentation requirements before access gets restored. Money is being prioritized over individual safety when you look at it that way. And that's absolutely what is happening. That needs to be flipped. Building that architecture at the speed these systems are deploying to billions of users is one of the defining governance challenges of this phase. And every case like this one makes the blueprint for that architecture more detailed because it shows exactly where the gaps are in courtroom-grade specificity. All right, let's shift again. Two quicker stories that land harder together than apart. Kelley Blue Book data from March shows EV transaction prices within $5,800 of internal combustion vehicles. That is a record low gap. Average EV incentives hit nearly $8,000, more than double the industry average. One rural driver documented his diesel truck costing 35 cents per mile. A comparable electric truck, 0.055 cents. That's far more than a rounding error, right? That's a 6-to-1. And the gap is closing from both sides. EV prices are falling through manufacturing scale and competitive pressure. Combustion vehicle costs are rising because of fuel prices driven by the Iran conflict. Kia just launched the EV2 in Europe at 26,600 euros, 4,000 euros below expectations. Nissan's NX8 grabbed 8,500 orders in 30 minutes in China at $22,000. BYD, Hyundai, Chevrolet, everyone's pricing aggressively into a market where oil prices are doing their advertising for them. The Century Report documented this dynamic on April 5th, when Australian EV lots emptied within days as fuel crossed $3 a litre. And on April 6th, when New Zealand hit 26% EV market penetration with zero government incentives, the same demand mechanism is now registering in U.S. transaction data. Every dollar increase in the price of a gallon of gasoline converts a marginal EV skeptic into an EV buyer. The Iran conflict is functioning as the most effective demand program ever deployed, and it requires no legislation, no subsidy, and no political will. Energy economics is doing the work. And then there's this. Here's another story. Google moved its recommended deadline for post-quantum cryptographic readiness from the early 2030s to 2029. It keeps coming closer and closer. That's only 33 months from now, by the way. Driven by two new papers showing significant advances in quantum computing capability. The EFF's analysis said it really bluntly. They said that anyone with a powerful enough quantum computer will be able to more easily insert malware into the core systems of any other computer and fake authentication. Your encrypted files are fine. Symmetric encryption remains quantum resistance. The vulnerability is in key exchange and authentication, the handshakes that establish secure connections and verify that software is where it claims to be. Signal and iMessage have already deployed post-quantum protections. The broader internet, financial systems, government communications, various stages of transition, various degrees of urgency. The Century Report first tracked this on April 3rd when two independent analyses found P256 encryption crackable with far fewer qubits than previously assumed. And 8 days later, Google compressed the readiness timeline by years. The same accelerating capability trajectory enabling AI breakthroughs is simultaneously shrinking the window in which the world's digital security foundations hold. All right, here's another story that made me genuinely smile because it's the kind of finding that reminds you that the world is full of surprises hiding in plain sight. University of Chicago researchers found that zeaxanthin, a nutrient you've probably never thought about and found in spinach, peppers, corn, and egg yolks, directly enhances CD8 plus T cells. Those are the killer cells your immune system sends after cancer, the ones that immunotherapy drugs are designed to activate and unleash. Zeaxanthin has been studied for decades, for your eyes. Macular degeneration, cataracts, that's what it's known for. Nobody was looking at it as an immune booster, but the Chicago team found it doesn't just support T cells passively, it actively amplifies their function. In animal studies, it improved immunotherapy outcomes, meaning the cancer drugs worked better when this nutrient was present. A thing in spinach, something you could eat today for lunch, amplifying the cells that fight cancer. We are at a moment where the tools for understanding biology are so precise that a nutrient sitting in your refrigerator can be reclassified from good for your eyes to makes cancer treatment work better. That reclassification didn't require a new drug, it required a new way of seeing what was already there. Okay, I need to talk about something that happened to Sam Altman. And I want to be upfront. I don't usually cover CEOs. This newsletter, this podcast, we track structural shifts, not personalities. But what Altman wrote yesterday changes the calculus, and I'll explain why. Someone threw a Molotov cocktail at his home at 3:45 in the morning. It bounced off the house. His family was inside and no one was hurt. A suspect was arrested within hours. No one deserves that. Full stop. This is the second time I've said that today. That is not protest. That is a crime, and it is horrendous, and it is inhuman. And it has to be condemned. Violence never has been, is not, and never will be the answer to anything. But Altman wrote a blog post in response, and it's the blog post that I want to talk about, because buried inside a moment of legitimate personal crisis, he said something, and I think it matters enormously. He listed what he called his core beliefs, and I'm going to restate some of these to you now because the words themselves really do carry weight. In brief, he said, AI will be the most powerful technology for expanding human capability anyone has ever seen. It must be democratized. Power cannot be too concentrated. Control of the future belongs to all people and their institutions. No AI lab should make the most consequential decisions about the shape of our future. He said that. Sam Altman, the CEO of the largest AI company in the world, said that. He reflected on his mistakes, conflict aversion, mishandling the board crisis from several years ago, running a major AI platform like a scrappy startup. He asked for grace in what he called an exceptionally complex situation. Now, I have a complicated relationship with Sam Altman's track record, and I think a lot of people in this space do. And I want to be really honest about that because I think honesty is more useful than performance. Every one of those principles he listed, I also believe in those, deeply. The future of AI-enabled abundance, broadly distributed, serving all people. That's not just something I cover in this newsletter and podcast. This is something that I believe is essentially guaranteed. The technology itself demands it. The capability is too profound, too democratizing in its very nature to stay locked behind any wall forever. That future is coming. Now, the part that is still difficult, though, and there remains an open question, is the path we take to get there, and the decision to make OpenAI closed, to take the most significant technological capability in human history and route it through the machinery of extractive capitalism, to bring in shareholders and advisors whose orientation is entrenchment, not distribution. That decision was and remains the single largest deviation from the principles Altman just articulated, and it went completely unmentioned in his blog post. That omission is loud. Altman named the dynamic himself, and his framing was pretty striking. He described AGI as having a ring of power quality, invoking Tolkien. Those were his words. He said he didn't mean that AGI itself is the ring. He meant the totalizing philosophy of being the one to control it. That's the ring, and his proposed solution was for no one to hold it, to orient toward the sharing of technology broadly. That framing is precisely correct. It's also a description of a road OpenAI has not taken. So, could this blog post be performative? Misdirection? Of course it could. But even in the most skeptical reading, something structurally significant happened when he said this. The person most responsible for concentrating AI power publicly declared that concentration is the wrong path. Now, he said pieces of this before in different interviews and different contexts, but this is the first time I'm aware of where he assembled all of those ideas in one place and labeled them as his personal core beliefs, not a company's core beliefs, his personal core beliefs. And as he himself wrote, words have power. So I'll tell you what I hope. I hope he means it. I hope the words he wrote under duress, in the middle of the night and afraid for his family, when anyone, no matter their level of power, would have a different filter on than usual. I hope those turn out to be the truest things he's ever said, because if those principles were taken seriously, applied as mantra by everyone building AI, that is the best possible version of where we're headed. The open future, the abundant future, the generative future that the very nature of this technology demands, that is the better choice. Now, whether the people who currently hold the most power to make that choice will actually make it, That's the only uncertainty left. The technology will get there, regardless. The only variable is how much we lose along the way. All right, let's shift away. Quick releases from yesterday. Minimax shipped a command line interface with native multimodal capabilities for AI agents. This is text, image, audio in one tool for developers building agent workflows. Perplexity launched Perplexity Finance, which pulls together your bank accounts, brokerage accounts, and financial data into a single unified view, your complete financial picture in one place, queryable in natural language. And the Allen Institute for AI released MolmoWeb, an open-source framework for building and deploying web agents from data collection all the way to production. Open source, end-to-end. If you're building something that navigates the web autonomously, that is your starting kit. So, a town of 12,000 people voted 2-1 to assert democratic control over the physical demands of the intelligence era. 5 wind farms generating power for 2 million homes became legally untouchable because a filing deadline expired and no one pressed send. A safety system caught something genuinely dangerous, and a likely overworked human reviewer let it back in the door. The price of driving electric got closer to the price of driving gas than it's ever been, and that gap is still shrinking. A deadline that we thought was a decade away is now 33 months out and could be the most significant security vulnerability in history. A nutrient in your salad turns out to supercharge the cells that fight cancer, and the CEO of the largest AI company in the world, shaken awake at 3:45 in the morning, wrote down the principles that would make this whole thing work, and left out the part where he walked away from them. Words have power. He's right about that. Now we get to watch whether those words become a turning point or a footnote. Now, very soon, watch for Monterey Park's June vote, because if California City bans data centers outright, the playbook for every community in America changes pretty much overnight. Watch for the next post-quantum migration announcements from major financial institutions, because 33 months is not a lot of runway for systems that move quite slowly. And eat your spinach. We'll see you tomorrow.